And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Jeff Woolwine, the man who tracks and films UFOs. Jeff, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Jeff, how did you get into chasing down these UFOs and filming them in the first place?
Oh, wow. That goes back to, when I was a kid. So I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. And, ever since I can remember, I've been seeing either orbs or just lights in the sky. And, I can remember being in the fifth grade and we saw this orange light. And I went to school the next day, and one of my good friends was a Native American boy, and I was like, "Dude, did you see that light last night?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." He goes, "My grandfather says he lives. Those lights live in those mountains over there." And they point to the west end of the valley, to the White Tank Mountains, and being a kid, you're just kind of blowing it off. You're like, "Wow, the lights live in the mountains." Okay, so let's go on. But the more and more, as time goes by and you're growing up and you're just seeing these things, it just makes you wonder what the heck is going on. So, in 2004, I made it a quest to actually find out exactly what these Phoenix lights were, exactly what was going on in my city. And so I went on a hunt to hunt these Phoenix lights down. And that's exactly what I did. Now, during my research over the years, I love history. I love archaeology. I've been an amateur archaeologist, 10 years before I became, this ufologist. And so I love history. I love, the Native Americans. I love the petroglyphs and all the stories and myths and legends. And, growing up, you're seeing these things. And, I started really concentrating on the Phoenix lights, because there was other sky watchers that were filming these lights. And so I was monitoring their situations, their sightings. And so once I heard that the lights were back in the summer of 2004, I had a good idea where to look. And this is because of the other sky watchers was watching the lights on the east side of Phoenix and Mesa. Now, the original 1997 Phoenix lights occurred on the west side of South Mountain, and they made this arc, and then they disappeared. And so, but there was more sightings seemed to be on the east side. So that's when I decided to go to the east side, and to hunt these things down. Well, it didn't take very long. Maybe a couple nights out there watching, I saw these two orange amber lights appear a few miles out in my direction, in my point of view, and they were moving east. They were moving towards South Mountain. And so, my curiosity peaked. That was my first, I finally got something on video, let's try to get closer. So I found Mesa Community College, and I climbed up on their set of bleachers, and I could overlook the whole city. And from there, I sat there the whole summer of 2004 watching these Phoenix lights appear right in front of me a few miles out in pretty much the same location. So these lights were coming in from the west, and they were moving really slow over this certain area. They would hover there for the longest time and then disappear. Then more would come in. So I must have got at least 200 or 300 sightings of this.
The original 1997 Phoenix Lights event was so huge and all over the media and just totally blew up. You're seeing them again in 2004. Why didn't they get as much traction in the news like they did prior?
Okay, so I've been studying this phenomenon for years, okay? And I'm not going off of hearsay. I'm not going off of, what other people are saying. I go on what we can prove. And what can we prove of what exactly happened March 13th, 1997, of lights on the west side of South Mountain? I mean, I know that there was reports of this mile-long V-shaped craft going over the city, going 8 miles an hour, but yet there's no video of this. So when I really dig deep into this situation here, I found out that there were sky watchers who was filming lights nights before March 13th. So they were ready for something to happen. This is one of the reasons why we have one of 4 videos. If thousands of people saw this, we only have 4 videos of what really happened that night. And this is because of the other sky watchers were watching and filming, so they were ready. And they got it. They got these lights on the west side of South Mountain. So my point is, if anything was going to fly over the city, they would have got it because they were looking for it. They were waiting for something to happen. They were out there all night. What happened? We had lights on the west side of the mountain. We have reports of other things going on, this mild, wide, V-shaped craft that no one can prove to this day. That's all fine and gravy. But, we have to go on what happened, what really happened that night, what we can prove with video is lights on the west side. And what did they do? They arced, between South Mountain and the Australia Mountain on the west side of Phoenix, and then they disappeared, and that was it.
Do you think that was one giant ship with all these lights, or was it multiple ships flying in formation?
Okay, so we're jumping the gun.
Wow.
So, I'm thinking this. Yeah, I'm thinking spaceships, crafts, technology, aliens. Boom, that's it. Because that's what we've been told all these years, right? And so I'm going into this, and seeing the lights firsthand now on a regular basis, almost every night in 2004 in Phoenix, hovering over this certain area, and we'll get to that here in a minute. I soon realized that, what, these wasn't ships at all. This was something living. This was possibly a living creature, some kind of living entity, if you will. And so months go by, and I'm talking to the news, and I did about 4 news reports that summer, and the end result was we're all seeing flares in Tucson 150 miles away, which was impossible because these lights are right here in the city hanging over this certain spot. Later, I come to find out that this certain spot was over a power plant that was bored down into the fault line of South Mountain. And so in 2004, they're saying we're seeing flares. I'm like, no, these things are by the mountain. I'm going to move to the mountain in 2005 to try to get closer and maybe get some day shots. Well, I did that. I moved to the east side of South Mountain, and I stayed there over 3 years. And it didn't take me long. The first couple of weeks, man, I saw this black object come out of the sky and come down right on the mountain there and disappear into the mountain. And, so I'm thinking spaceships, crafts, aliens. Oh my gosh, there's got to be a crop circle. There's got to be evidence of a spaceship, let's go out there. Let's go investigate. And so that's exactly what I did. So the next day I went out there to the exact same spot where I saw this thing go down at. What do I find? I find a huge boulder with petroglyphs on it from the Hohokam Indians, the first Native Americans who first lived in Phoenix, Arizona, of a stick figure man looking up at the exact same thing that I filmed the day before, along with spirals. Now let's jump back about 3-4 months prior to this, okay? So I remember seeing a Native American who worked at the Pueblo Indian Art Museum in downtown Phoenix. He was up on South Mountain. He was talking about the petroglyphs. And he was saying that, so one of the persons turned around and said, hey, this stick figure man looks like he's looking up at something above his head. And Dave, he turned around and quickly and said, yes, that's part of the interpretations here, is that our ancestors saw and recorded things, in the sky for future generations. So I kept that in the back of my head. I got it. I got his contact info. I had all this information in my head up until that point where I went to the petroglyphs, and I'm seeing the stick figure guy looking up at this black orb that I filmed, the day before, and spirals. And I'm like, dude, we have strange lights in the sky. Now we have strange markings on the rocks out here. There's got to be a connection. No one has talked about this. So the Phoenix lights happened in 1997. Here we're in 2005, and all these other sky watchers and ufologists, they're not talking about what the Native Americans are saying. They're not talking about what the petroglyphs are talking about. So, I'm like, hey, there's got to be a connection. So I called up Dave and I said, hey, I saw you on Channel 8 a few months back, talking about the petroglyphs on South Mountain. Could you please, teach me, the ways of the petroglyphs, And I really didn't tell him what I was doing, what my goal was, but I just wanted to get, I wanted to figure out what these petroglyphs were meaning, what they truly meant from, who better than ask than, the guy who works at the Indian Art Museum and who does tours on the petroglyphs. So we went up there on South Mountain and we talked about spirals. We talked about all this other stuff and went into some real details things. Like the spirals, when the spirals go clockwise, it's a doorway in. When a spiral goes counterclockwise, it's a doorway out. And he was telling me that when the spiral ends down, 9 times out of 10, it's going to end at that crack of the stone. He says that crack is the emergence point for the spirits. This whole time, he's talking about spirits and spirits of the earth and sky. Not once is he's talking about, crafts or anything like that, but he's talking about spirits who are able to manifest themselves into the stone, into the underworld. He says when a spiral ends up, he says that means there's a vortex in the sky. I go, a vortex? He goes, yeah, it's like looking down into a hole. That spiral is like looking down into a hole. And these spirits, just magically appear in the sky. When the spiral goes clockwise, it's a doorway in. When a spiral goes counterclockwise, it's a doorway out. Well, when I found that boulder, I had 2 spirals there, one going in, one coming out, which is telling me that this is an emergence point, for both entrance and leaving. And so he's going into like, they call these other petroglyphs up there anthropomorphs, because they shape shift and all these other things. And so I learned a lot. And, we talked about the giants, how there was, giants on South Mountain, and we talked about the petroglyphs of giants. And later on in my hiking and exploring South Mountain in the 3 years, actually I spent 15 years on the mountain, but I spent 3 years staying real close, about a mile away from South Mountain, to videotape these things. And so once all that happened, I was like, there's got to be a connection to this. And I'm still thinking, wait a minute, how can a spaceship, how can a craft, right, get into a little crack like that of the stone? Okay, so I'm still on the fence about these crafts, okay, because I'm seeing something different. Okay, it's possible, right? Well, weeks go by and the sightings are increasing, okay, and I'm starting to learn that these things were alive, right? I'm seeing like flying snakes. Okay. I'm seeing flying orbs that are shape-shifting. Okay. I'm seeing diamonds that are shape-shifting in the sky. I'm seeing strange things that are moving in ways that, it defies logic. Okay. And they're changing color. Okay. And it's cool because when they come down from the sky, they're solid. And when they go down to the mountain, I understand why they call them spirits now, because you can see through them, right? You can see through them like a ghost. And they absorb themselves into the stone. Same way when they come out also. When they come out, they're like a ghost, or they're a spirit. You can see through them. But as they start climbing higher and getting further away from the mountain, then they become more solid and they start to shapeshift. And studying these things for 3.5 years out there, man, and seeing them on a regular basis, I was convinced that this is something different. This is not crafts at all. These things are alive, right? And the more exploring I did on South Mountain, uncovering the petroglyphs and uncovering evidence of giants and evidence of tombs and evidence of the Mayans being here in Phoenix, and I was collecting all this evidence, this whole year.
Did you start noticing patterns? And what I mean by that is, like, every day at 6 o'clock they would leave, and at midnight they would come back. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So in the full first year that I watched them, I was tracking them, and I tracked what months was heavy, what months they were tame, they were kind of gone, what months they came back, the times and the dates. Yes, I was doing all that investigation. I was doing 3 years. I sat by that mountain. Okay, I didn't do nothing but stare at that rock. Okay, and I tracked the sun, just like what the Hohokams are doing. I tracked the seasons, and I learned that it was a pattern between the equinox and the solstice, right? And yes, so I did learn that around 5:30, between 5:30 is good, and 6 o'clock, man, it was heavy. And those things were coming and going from the mountain, and they knew I was watching them. And it was crazy because it was like they would dance in front of me in the sky.
How did they know that you were watching them?
Because they were flying right at me. They were coming off the mountain, they were leaving the mountain, and they were flying right over me. When you look at my YouTube channel, you can see my older stuff. Those things are flying right over my window, and those things are flying right by my window, and things like that, And and the more and more I went out there, the more and more I was connecting the petroglyphs. I filmed this crooked snake leave South Mountain up in the sky, and I went out there and I found the petroglyph of a crooked snake. Well, I brought all this to the news, and the news just ate it up. This was a new concept on the Phoenix Lights, a new story on UFOs in Phoenix, because this was never done before. So this was top notch. This was incredible discovery. That we can actually now we now proved that the petroglyphs is in fact prehistoric UFO sightings without a shadow of a doubt. Up until that point, we thought the Native Americans were carving UFOs. We thought this, and we thought. I'm here to tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, man, that stuff's real. That stuff's correct. Those are prehistoric UFO sightings carved on the mountains around Phoenix and in locations where these things are being seen at, and without a shadow of a doubt. And so that's when Pat Usker was in town. Now he was involved in the UFO magazine, and so he saw me on the news talking about the petroglyph connections to the Phoenix Lights and this new type of UFO. And so he asked me. He was like, "Hey, I had this show idea called UFO Road Trip. Would you like to be a part of it?" And I said, sure. So I wrote a 7-page article for UFO Magazine in 2005. And I took Pat up on South Mountain to show him the petroglyphs and to show him this new type of UFO that matched the petroglyphs. And later on, that turned into the UFO Hunter Show. And then they came back in 2007 when the show aired on the History Channel and asked me if I'd like to be a part of the episode called Arizona Lights. And I said, sure. So I took him up on the mountains and I showed him the petroglyphs, and we talked about the Phoenix Lights connections. And that episode actually inspired Ancient Aliens. And then from that, Ancient Aliens, over 2-3 years later, took over the UFO Hunter Show. And that's the reason why UFO Hunter Show got canceled, is because of Ancient Aliens. But later on, Pat was telling me that the producers liked what I was doing, and it gave them this idea to start the Ancient Aliens TV series. So I had a lot to do with getting those shows going. And so over the years, I'm finding more evidence of the history of Phoenix. And it wasn't just, simple Hohokam people making peace-loving pots and having parties and doing dances and things like this and building canals. It was a lot deeper. It went way deeper. The petroglyphs and that I was discovering, and the altars and the tombs that I was finding, and possible evidence of giants and the petroglyphs of giants. All of this. I'm like, dude, what is going on here? I'm collecting all this data, and how come I'm the only one talking about this? The archaeologist sure isn't talking about this, because I was on the news with that guy. Once this started breaking, that I was, filming things that were carved in the sky over 1,000 years ago, the archaeologist wanted to get involved in that. And of course he, blamed all that, decredited, tried to, make it not seem, credible or whatever. But, it is, you know what I'm saying? So everything was correct out there, and he was just, lying out his butt. And it just made me realize, why conceal all of this, and also, They made South Mountain a government park. So you can't go up there and start digging stuff up and digging up these tombs, man, because you'll go to prison. So yeah, that was interesting too. Why make South Mountain a government park? Why not make the White Tank Mountains a government park? Why not make the Superstition Mountains a government park? What's so special about South Mountain? Well, I decided to go to Phoenix, downtown Phoenix Library, the main library in Phoenix, and I went to the fourth floor government department. I said, just give me everything you have on South Mountain. Let's do the paper trail now. I've done the hiking trail. I found all this evidence. What's going on? What's in the library? Give me everything you have on South Mountain. The lady came out. I had to give an ID. I had to give my license to see this. Lady came out with this folder, opened it up. Boom, 1967s and later, South Mountain. I opened it up, and there was the first park ranger, Charles Holbert, from late 1930s to the late 1940s, and he was the very first park ranger there in Phoenix. And apparently, this guy was a big man in the field. I mean, I found files on him that I couldn't even get to, not only in Phoenix, but like in California and Utah and all over the West Coast. I mean, this guy, he was famous, and he just wasn't a custodian for the park, man. This guy knew what he was doing. And the Native Americans, they trusted him enough to tell him who the Hohokam people was and what happened to these people and why they dug all these canals and what was going on here, He had all this story. He wrote all this stuff in his journals, okay? And when I'm starting to read all this stuff, he's talking about the first thing he names his writings was the lost city of Cibola, the lost city of gold. And I found that very interesting because, the Spanish conquistadors, today, the archaeologists won't even admit that the Spanish even came this far. But there's so much evidence that they did. And they were here in Phoenix, and they were looking for what is the 7 cities of the lost gold. And they thought that Phoenix was one of them. And because of the native traditions, the oral talk of the history of Phoenix, Arizona, they say that Phoenix was named from the formal civilization, this fiery bird rising up from the formal civilization. Well, who was this formal civilization? We have very little. The archaeologists and the history people are telling us very little of these people. All right. But the mountains are like sacred scrolls, is holding the story of what happened to these people and what they went through for 1,000 years living in this valley. And when I started reading all of this, the story went on to say that the Hohokam people came from Mexico and they migrated here to the valley. And it just wasn't the Hohokam people. There was other tribes, that came to this valley. And it was basically, it had everything to do with the Phoenix Lights, what they saw in the sky. There was some hunting and gathering, of course, and some trade, because we find old pottery shards from dirt from California and Utah. So there was other tribes, that was here in the valley. And long story short, it was basically here to see the Phoenix Lights and to see these, what they call anthropomorphs, this new type of UFO. And, things were going well, just like the Mayans were here also. He talks about how the Mayans were here. And things were going good for 1,000 years. There were sacrificing altars that was going on in Phoenix that I found that he writes about. And there was gold tombs left from the Mayans. And so everything was going good for 1,000 years. Sacrificing was going on, and they're seeing the lights and everything like that, until one day, for reasons unknown, the sacrificing stopped. And when that happened, see, it wasn't a desert landscape as it is now. It wasn't all dirt and rocky. It was a tropical-like landscape back in the day. And we can find evidence of this from the huge waterfalls down the mountains of Phoenix, Arizona, and weathering on the rocks. I mean, this was not desert. This was a tropical-like landscape with tons of water. But when the stories say when the sacrificing stopped, that's when the water started to subside and everything started dying out and the food became scarce, and the tribal people were yelling at their ancestors, their leaders, "Why did you stop the sacrifice? The gods are upset with us. We haven't seen the gods." They're talking about the Phoenix Lights. They're talking about the anthropomorphs. We haven't seen them. Why did you stop? Everything's dry. We have no food. We have no water. Why did you do this? And then just then, the legends say that these things came from the east, and they picked these people up, and they took them up into the sky. And this coincides with the petroglyphs, because I found the petroglyphs of these orbs, these Phoenix Lights, these anthropomorphs coming down and taking people up into the sky. Now, Charles Holbrook goes on to write that they were survivors to this, and they were afraid, and they ran into caves, right? And they saw what was going on. And when it was all over with, they vowed never to live in this valley again. They called South Mountain Mount Sapoa, Mountain of Mercy. And they vowed never to come back. This was a cursed land. They knew that if they were going to continue to live in this valley of the sun, that eventually they would have to go back to war with these spirits of the earth and sky. Now, this is interesting too, because I found a petroglyph panel where it shows a type of war that was going on with these anthropomorphs, these Phoenix Lights, with the Native Americans shooting bows and arrows up into the sky at these things, along with this other type of entity that we might have time to get into later. But there apparently, according to the myths, according to the legends and the rock art, yes, there was some type of war that went on, and these people disappeared. And the people that survived, they said, we're not going to live here no more. So Charles Holbrook writes in his journals, they said they piled the gold. The gold was as tall as a saguaro cactus and as round as the sun. And they buried all this gold in South Mountain. And they went back to Mexico, vowing never to return into this valley.
Are you saying that the beings that were already here harvested these Indians and took them into wherever, into space? Or did another race of beings come and harvest the human population and take them away?
In my studies, in my serious studies, 25 years of this, and studying the rock art and studying the myths and seeing the stuff from my own eyes and looking at history and looking at what the world says, what the earth says about these things, what history says about these things, I'm looking at more, they're not from outer space, they're from inner space. And I believe that this is their planet also, that they have been here the whole time. I believe that they were here before us.
So would you call them ultra-terrestrials?
I don't know. That's a good question. Interterrestrial.
I like that, interterrestrial. Do you think that they took those native people into the inner earth?
So that's deep. We're going deep. We're going real deep here, right? So, so like I said, I believe that these things have always been here. Just as the oceanographers is finding new species of life, in the oceans, this is a new species of life that has always been here. And in my studies, in my travels, in my seeing these things, I believe that we're dealing with many different types of entities here. And there are good ones and there are bad ones. And when we really look at it, like when we look at some of these ancient scrolls, okay, some of these ancient scrolls, they tell us, in these old manuscripts, they tell us that at the end of days, we will be caught up into the clouds, to be judged. And, so when we look at what happened to the Hohokam, and what does the Hohokam name mean? So the Pimas named the Hohokam because they said that these were the people who who went missing, who were taken away, because we don't know what happened to these people. They lived here for 1,000 years and they simply vanished. Archaeologists wants us to believe, well, they simply migrated somewhere else, but there's no trace of where they went. The petroglyphs and the oral traditions tell us that these people were taken away by what they saw in the sky, while others, fled and hid and took off and never came back. So when we look at what some of these old scriptures tell us about our possible future, and then we look at what happened to the Hohokam, the people who got taken away, was this a type of rapture that happened to the Hohokam? I don't know, but I think it's very interesting that these scriptures, they tell us that we will be caught up, and the Hohokams were caught up. So I'll probably leave it at that before we get into any more detail.
Do you think that these beings are completely non-corporeal, or perhaps once they go underground, they do become physical?
Oh man, so there. I mean, this is something different here. Like, I mean, we understand spaceships, technology, aliens. We can cope with that, but when it comes down to something supernatural, right? Something that can absorb himself into the stone, something that's conscious, that knows who's watching and who's not, something that can't be picked up on radar, something that you can see through them. I mean, this and is alive. So this is scary stuff. So this is one of the reasons why this was hush hush. This is not talked about. All right, and we're being misled. Okay, on the true facts here, on why and what I really think is happening here. We're getting reports of other things, but then we're seeing something different. All right, so we have the reports, we can't verify, but we have what we see for our own eyes that we can verify, and what the rock art is telling us. So I'm looking at this as 3 points of credibility here. One, we can look at what the old scripture is and old scrolls like the Anunnaki and the Essenes and people like that, tell us about what they saw in the sky. And then we can come out on the rocks and we can see the exact same carvings, right? Depictions of what is written in these old scrolls. And then now for the third credibility, we're seeing them for our own eyes now. Okay, that's where the credibility is. Okay, we can match all these little pieces. All the pieces are coming together here, And so all this evidence is taking me down a different path. I started going down this path, thinking aliens, spaceships, technology. They're here to help us. This is great. I can't wait. But the 15 years of research, right, has totally changed my mind. Okay, I have to go with what the facts is telling me, what the evidence is telling me. I can't sugarcoat this, thinking, oh, this is a wonderful thing, when the history of these things is telling us a different story here, right? I'm sorry, but we really have to look at this. We have to take a second look at what the ancestors are telling us, what the scrolls are telling us, what the rock art is telling us, what the evidence is telling us. And when you put all of this connections together, it all seems to fit, and it all goes straight, narrow, right down the path to understanding what is really here and what we're really dealing with here, and what about our future.
Well, you're meeting the good ones because they're not messing with you. They're flying over you, as you said earlier.
So, like I said, we have many different types of things here. Like on South Mountain, when I was studying them, I found that so these cracks, these canyons down the side of these mountains with these spirals. So that's the doorway. That's the emergence point into the underworld for these things. And so when I was looking at South Mountain all these years, I started to notice that this canyon here was for the flying serpent. This canyon over here was for the flying orbs. This canyon over here, that was the diamonds. That canyon over there, that was the shapeshifters. So each doorway had a different creature coming out of it. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that was fascinating.
Some of my guests are able to film these things that look like plasma orbs, which they're not really circular. They're kind of like morphing plasma up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same thing you're seeing?
Yeah. So let's go back just a tad bit. So when the Native Americans tell us that they're going down into the underworld, that's they at the time they didn't understand the science to it all. And so it really wasn't the underworld, but it was the fault line, right? Just as our power plants today are outskirts on the ends of these mountains here. These power plants are bored down into the mountain to absorb the energy to turn on our lights. And that's what these things was attracted to, right here to that power plant. All right. So that's the reason why these things are around these certain mountains, is because of the energy that it's drawing, that it's producing, that it's natural energy. So I learned all of that in Phoenix. Now, when I come here to Tucson, because of my experiences in Phoenix, I know what to look for. I know what the petroglyphs, to look for. I know the mountains. I know, basically, I all this I learned on my own. So I'm really ready to go when I get here to Tucson. And so I'm sky watching. I'm living by the mountain out here. Every once in a while, we'd see an orb fly over, go down on the mountain, or one would leave the mountain. And this is the mountain here behind me. It's called, well, these are this mountain here, that's called the Catalina. And then we have the Mount Lemon right behind this mountain here. And but every once in a while, I would see a light orb, nothing spectacular, up until May of 2025. What happened in May of 2025? A major solar storm. Okay, so much that if you were able to take a picture of the north, you would see the northern lights. And this was at midnight. And so May of 2025, I think it was May 10th, I believe. My wife we're on the second floor. We're overlooking this mountain here. And she's taking pictures, and we're looking at it and then seeing the lights in the picture, the aurora lights, the northern lights. And I'm like, dude, what's these little specks? What's these specks I'm seeing in the photo? What is going on with that, So I grabbed my night vision camera, and lo and behold, oh my gosh, I'm seeing these orbs flying in the aurora lights, in the northern lights, and they're going down on the mountain, and they're coming out, and there's swarms of them. They're like bugs, dude. There are like so many of them out there. I'm filming. I'm like, oh my God, there were so many orbs out there, right? And it was just insane. And this happened right in the middle of me moving. Okay, so after I wasn't expecting that they were going to return the next night. I was like, oh my God, I'm glad I got that on film. That was great. Let's move on. So I had to move. And so that took me about a month or so to get set up and to get my equipment back out and get ready. And, and lo and behold, I ended up moving closer to this mountain, in the middle of the mountain now, overlooking the north and the east side of the mountains here. And so we're out there on my balcony, second story, and I see this light appear in the sky and then disappear. I'm like, holy cow. So I brought up the night vision, and lo and behold, they followed us. They moved. They migrated, because I was on the west side of the Catalinas. Now I'm in the middle, but over the last 30 days or so, the orbs had moved, and not at 12 midnight anymore, but at 1 o'clock in the morning. And so I was like, okay, so that was cool. I'm filming the lights, and they're moving east. They're migrating east. And so every night I'd go out the balcony, and sure enough, they would be there every night, and they would end a little further out. And then by the time the next month would come in, they would be coming in an hour later, and still migrating east. Let me just go ahead and bring up my little, hopefully I won't get kicked out of here for doing this, but let me bring up this little, that's not it, my little map here. I tracked them all the way, and they were moving east. It started in May, and then at midnight, and then by December, they had migrated completely out of Tucson, coming in at 4, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Do you think that all these beings are going out there to absorb this energy from the solar storms?
Right. And so May, we had it at 12 a.m. All right. They're coming in. They're flying in west. They're going over this certain spot. They're getting real bright, and then they dissipate, and then more come in, and they're getting bright over that same area, and then they go away. And then the next month, in June at 1 a.m., they're a little bit more further east of the mountain, still on that pattern, coming over this energy spot, getting real bright. And then, it's September, they're coming in at 3 o'clock. And then during the December, during the solstice, at 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay. And so I soon realized that because, I'm asking myself, well, why are they moving east? Why are they moving east? Well, it was because of the rotation of the Earth. And so that 1 May 2024 solar flare event just brought them here. Boom, not only here in Tucson, but all around the world. Okay. But then we didn't have really any other major solar storms. Okay. So they had to feed on something. All right. So they're here, but there's no food. Okay. The solar storm stopped. They can't. So what else to get the energy from was from the fault lines of the mountain and from the rotation of the Earth. So the Earth, when you look from the northern area, it's going west to east, right? The rotation is going west to east. And this is the way these things are moving to absorb the energy. And the energy fluctuates with each different hour, all right? And see, a lot of people hasn't got this far yet. But I've looked deep into this, man, trying to figure out what is going on. This is the only logical explanation that I can discover here, to find here, is they're going the rotation of the Earth for the energy. And they're going down into the fault line of Mount Lemmon, which is behind the Catalinas. See, we're seeing them over the Catalinas, but they're actually going down behind the Catalinas into Mount Lemmon. And so Mount Lemmon has these huge canyons. All right. And so I was watching where these things were coming and going from. And it just so happens that May had its own canyon, and July had a canyon, and August, and all these months, dude, they had these canyons, right? And so they're coming and going from the canyons behind the mountain here, all the way up until December, and they were gone out. And then it fluctuates. So there's a pattern here, and it has everything to do with the solstice and the equinox. Okay. So by January of 2025, they had returned, but this time they're on the east side of Mount Lemmon, or the Catalinas, right? And then it went from January north, and then February east. They're now February in 2025. They're now at the Recon Mountains east of Tucson, and then in March and April, boom, they're on the west, right? And then in May, they made a complete circle. In a year's time, they're right back where they started at in May of 2025. And what happened again in May? Another solar storm. And boom, that brought more of them, not only here in Tucson, but around the world. All right. And then boom, solar storms. Boom, boom. We've had a lot of solar storms in the last, few months, especially last year, right? And they're feeding off this energy here. And it has everything to do with the solar storms in combination with the fault lines of the natural energy and the rotation of the Earth. So if we continue to have these solar storms, then we're going to start seeing a lot more of them. And when the solar storms stop, then they're going to be forced to feed off Earth's rotation, west to east, from the natural fault lines in the Earth of these mountains. And so, yeah, so, and then it repeated itself, and then they're gone. And then in 2026, where are they now? Right now, over here on the east side again.
How,
3 years.
how intelligent do you think these beings are? Because they could be highly intelligent, or they could be just like a migrating herd looking for food.
So they're highly intelligent. When we look at the history of these things, Charles Holbrook writes in his journals that when the Hohokam people first arrived here, they didn't know how to live. So the spirits of the earth and sky interacted with these people and taught these people how to survive and how to live. Matter of fact, some of the Hopi traditions tell us that the Hopis, or that the spider women taught the Hopis how to weave their baskets by slinging her web up into the sky. And I can tell you right now that in 2005, I filmed that spider woman fly right by my window, and it made video of the day on News Channel 3 in Phoenix. So that myth is true. There's a being out there that looks like a spider because I filmed it, and it's incredible. And so I think some of these myths and legends, is more real than just a legend, because I'm finding some of the stuff is facts. And so when we look at the situation here, when the Holocaust got here, these things taught these people how to live, how to survive. And some of them was stuff, some of these things, stuff mankind was not meant to know about. Right? They were teaching them the secret incantations. They were teaching them the secret ways that man was not, allowed to know of. Right? And this is probably what led to their downfall. This is because they knew how to, let's say, move mountains, because that's one of the stories here, is that they had secret chants where they could say the secret chant and move mountains. And that's exactly some of the myths and legends say the kids got hold of these words and they were moving these mountains. So the holy people came down and took that language away from them. And this is the reason why we have art, we have petroglyphs instead of written language, is because the holy people took that written language away from them years ago. So all they had now was drawings to describe what they're seeing for future generations, and in the places where the event took place. So we see a petroglyph, okay, and some of these petroglyphs, I'm sure you've seen them. They're high up on cliffs, right? And so what the artist is trying to do, he wants the viewer to put the whole landscape in with the art, because that's the whole idea here. All right. They didn't have video cameras. They have cell phones to record their sightings, but they had locations on the spots where the event took place at. So if they saw something in the sky, they would carve it in the sky. So if you saw a flying snake in the sky, you would climb high up on that mountain. You would carve this flying snake.
Let me ask you a hypothetical question here. Let's say tomorrow you go outside and there are thousands of these beings in the sky coming down, if not tens of thousands. Would you stay outside to greet them, or would you run and hide?
No, I would take off, because I know I'm telling my wife, look, these things are here for a reason. Okay, look at the way the world is now. Okay, I mean, we're about, it's crazy here on Earth. And one of the legends is, when mankind gets too noisy on Earth, it brings these things out, because they don't like the noise. All these wars where we've been having and stuff and all this other crazy stuff, there's a lot of noise here on Earth, and there's a lot more people, and the history tells us, what happened is these things that we see in the skies today had something to do with not only the Hohokam disappearing, but some of these other tribes around the world that disappeared at the same time when the Hohokam people disappeared. Isn't that just interesting? We have these tribes that lived in different places with no internet connection. to talk to each other about what's going on. But yeah, they're erecting, pyramids, and they're doing spirals, and they're doing other things that, this other tribe over here in this other part of the world is doing too. And so how is all that related? And then all of a sudden they disappeared, everybody disappeared at the same time, leaving archaeologists puzzled. Well, they just simply migrated because there's no water, so they went somewhere else and left. All right. I'm sorry, that's not what the mountains tell us. That's not what the oral tradition tell us. And so there's a lot of history here that has been purposely covered up, and I believe that is what's going on here. And all this supposed disclosure, and because everyone is seeing them now, the governments can't deny this stuff anymore, because everyone's seeing them. So they're doing a few things here. Like I said before, everyone can relate to spaceships, technologies, and aliens. Because we've been to the moon and we're getting ready to go outside our solar system. Blah blah. We're used to that. We can accept that. But if they actually come out and say, hey, guess what, people? We got something flying around in our skies that can shapeshift and go on the mountains, and check it out. They feed off energy. And wow, isn't that great? And they might have something to do with the Holcomb disappearance. Isn't that great? Wow, we're being visited, man. They're here. How many people would stay in that city? You know what I'm saying? You can't have that. You can't cause mass panic here. So they're using, first it was flares, then it was balloons, and now, in my opinion, it's crafts and aliens, because we can accept that, all right? And here we're back to what is credible and what we can prove. Spaceships, aliens, technology, that's all gravy. I am open to that. I have seen some things in the sky that could resemble a craft. I'm not saying that crafts are not possible. But what I am saying, I think the majority of what the people are seeing today, something different. These are not spaceships. They're not crafts. They're living entities. They're living creatures. All right. And they have a past, and their past and their history is here on Earth. And the evidence is carved on these mountains. And we really need to take a serious look at what these petroglyphs are talking about, because it's not just some graffiti or just a story of hunting and gathering. It goes deeper than that, man. It's telling us this is how I was able to find these things here, with the spirals, and what the petroglyphs are telling us, right? Once you understand the petroglyphs, understand the past, you will understand the future. All right, so here we're having, look at these two orbs here. All right, look, and they're slowly but surely going down. Now look, there's one coming out of the mountain, and this is actually from behind the Canalitas. We're looking at Mount Lemmon. And so, yeah, look at that. Look how they're coming down. They're going down into the fault line, into the doorway of Mount Lemmon that's behind this Catalina Mountains here that we're overlooking now. And so we see them going down and then one leaving. So that's just some of what's going on here. And that's basically, and there's more to this sighting.
All right, that's a good one. Are you filming this just with your camera, or are you using some kind of night vision goggles?
Yeah, so I'm using Creative XP night vision goggles. And this one doesn't have the time and date stamp, and this one doesn't have a mic, but this is the only one that I found that works good enough to look at that sucker. Look how it gets real bright right there. See that? Mm-hmm. Look how he's getting brighter, and he's going in the mountain there, right? So he's absorbing that energy. I think we would glow bright too if we're sucking up all that energy. Oh man. So I saw this thing come out of the mountain, and it was crazy. It's moving, it's shape-shifting, it's changing colors. And, the inexperience will say, oh, that's just a bunch of balloons, dude. But when you study it, it's not acting like balloons. It's acting like it's alive. Is it playing?
All right, let me play it.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is what you would call a jellyfish one,
well,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to call them. I mean, anthropomorphs, they're shape-shifting. This was in 2006. And you'll see it kind of look like a lamb, like right there. See that? See how it changes shape? Look how it's moving in the sky. It's not blowing around like balloons are. It's on a mission. It's going in a straight line, and it's shape-shifting. See that, how it's in control? Now, balloons would be all over the place like this. This thing is in control. It's alive. It's moving. It's shape shifting. It's going across the sky there. It's coming right by me. Look at that. Look how it's looking around now. Okay. This is what we're dealing with, folks. This is something completely different. And like I said, I believe that these things have always been with us. But the way things are, escalating, just look at that. Look how it's separated right there. There's a good picture right there. See that? And so this was taken with a high-8 video camera back in 2006. So the video quality, forgive me, I'm doing on my budget what I can afford, and this is a high-8 video camera, VHS tape, and but yeah, and you can tell that this isn't normal. All right.
Yeah.
Balloons don't act that way, and so yeah. We're looking west, and we just had a solar storm, and it was on the west of the solar disk, and so it shot these things on the west side of the valley. And this is how I was able to track these things with the solar storm, is when the solar storm would happen on the sun. If the sun was a solar storm on the west, then we would see more on the west side. If the solar storm was on the north, we'd see them on the north. But here on the west, so they're coming out of the mountains here. Look at that. This is what we're dealing with, folks. This is what's here in Tucson. This is what I've been filming every night since May of 2024.
That's amazing. Is anybody else in Tucson seeing these as well?
So there is airplane activity, and there is somebody monitoring this. I talk about this in my book. So yeah, there is other people in the sky watching these things, monitoring what's going on. Probably the Men in Black or somebody else is watching these things. They know, they've been monitoring these things. And as soon as I came public with this stuff, then they started monitoring me also. Same thing in Phoenix. I had the same problem in Phoenix. I was dealing with black helicopters, and little white Cessna airplanes was following me around. And so that's basically what's happening again. But yes, there are airplanes that are watching these things. And then, so when I post my videos on YouTube or in some of the groups in Tucson here, I have people contacting me. They want to see them. I've done a couple of MUFON shows, Tucson MUFON, and I talk about them. And then we set up time and dates to go out and watch them. So yeah, I've taken quite a few people out to see. Look how good, look how bright that sucker got. I've taken a lot of people out to see these things. And so it's almost time for the public to start seeing them again, because right now they're over here on the east side and they're kind of small. And the only way to really see them is with the night vision. But when they get real bright like that, boy, you can see them without the night vision, with the naked eye, and it's just incredible to see. And so that's what I'm waiting for. And I believe if they keep their pattern, if we don't have any more major solar flares, then they will keep their pattern. So by May or even March, we should see them again in the same spot, this bright again. But if we have more major solar storms, then no telling, what could happen. It could really intensify the energy out here. And, with more solar storms, there's just going to be more activity. I mean, this is the new normal now.
Right.
This is what's happening. Ooh, look at this guy. Oh, my goodness. I love this one. This is one of my favorites. I filmed this in Glendale. When I lived over there, they're flying over my apartment. And look at that sucker. Okay? Oh, my God. This is what we're dealing with, people. So if that was a balloon, then it would bobbing all over the place. But if you notice, it's going in a straight line. Look at that sucker. Oh, that's a beautiful one. Oh, I love this one so much. Oh, my God. Look at that sucker. And I'm using a stabilizer on it. So that's why if you see it shake every once in a while, it's because I used a stabilizer to make it come out more crisp and clear and not shaking. But yeah, look how this thing is moving. Okay.
How big do you think that thing is?
Oh my God, it's got to be at least a car, maybe a little bit bigger. I mean, it was huge. So look how it's changing shape and moving through the sky. Look at that. It clearly looks like it's alive. It's on a mission. It knows what it's doing, man. It's not bobbing around in the wind like balloons does, because you would think that, and you see these orbs on it, dude. So it's like it's anthropomorphing with the orbs. The orbs are morphing together. They're connected together. Because if that was balloons, then they would be like this. You know how balloons act. We don't need to go back to the 5th grade and learn what balloons look like. We all know what balloons look like in the sky. I'm telling you, that is not a balloon. Oh, look at that. I love that one right there. Look at that formation. Woo! Love it. Look at that. This is what we're dealing with, folks. I filmed that in 2019. I've been seeing these things ever since 2005. I was the first one to discover this in the United States in 2005. But in Mexico, they've been seeing these type of creatures a lot longer. So they're seeing these huge, like mile-long snakes and these weird things up in the sky in Mexico. So they're migrating. They've been migrating from Mexico over into Phoenix, over into our neck of the woods, and the activity is increasing. More is coming, and oh my God, that was in 19. So I can't imagine what the activity is now at South Mountain. I plan on doing a trip to go back to South Mountain in March because there's a lot of things there that I want to film and document and present in my own show, and that's going to be a great time, March. And so hopefully I'm pretty sure I'll come back with a good sighting because like I said, they knew I was coming. They've been watching me since I was a kid. This is obviously my destiny. I was meant to do this because I kept seeing them and I just had to find out for my own. I didn't go on hearsay. I didn't go what somebody else wants to write in their books, and I wanted to go out and see it and experience it for myself and find out exactly what was going on. And like I said, I was going down the same path as everyone else, but when I dive deep into it, 15 years of research of this stuff, man, my total outlook on these things is different, so it's just it changes you. It does. It changes you. It changes your perspective on life. Now, I mean, we're animals, we're just intelligent animals, like dogs, and so we really don't count. It's really these things, it's their planet. And basically we're just visitors here. And so the time is going to come, and I think it's going to be soon, when everyone is going to know that, we're being visited by something, and it's up to people like you and I to explain to the people what to look for and what's going on here, from our own personal experiences.
Does a person have to live in Arizona to be able to see this stuff?
So I get that question a lot. So the first thing I tell, future sky watchers is, we first want to find out if there's any mountains around you with petroglyphs. All right. Petroglyphs with spirals on it is what we're looking for. Petroglyphs with anthropomorphs, little shape-shifting things that we just saw in the sky just now. If you see that on the rock, then that is the location. That's the hot spot. But there are other petroglyphs on these other mountains that only depict hunting and gathering and things like that. So we want to look for the spirals and the anthropomorphs. Those are the holy mountains, right? Then we want to investigate what the Native Americans say about these mountains. Is it a holy mountain? What's the story on that? And then the only way to really verify if a mountain is active or not is to sit and watch. That's all I did in Phoenix. I spent 3.5 years by that mountain, and I constantly studied it and watched it. I didn't leave my kitchen window with my camera. I was there, and if anything was going to fly by me, it was sleeping. I was in the bathroom, and so I was ready. And that's when I verified what was here, and that's how I was able to get all these shots. So I think fault lines, major fault lines. Has a lot to do with it also. But the first thing you want to find out is what does the Native Americans say about your land? If there's nothing special about it, then I would just move along. But if they're talking about spirits and spirals and that's what you're looking for.
You mentioned you have a book. What's the title of it, and where can people find out more about it?
How I tracked UFOs around Tucson, Arizona, the Tucson Lights. So yeah, you can find that on Amazon. And man, it's got some great stuff in there. It's got petroglyphs of orbs over the Catalina Mountains here that's carved on the Catalinas. It explains on what the spirals are talking about. It explains on how the Mayans was in Phoenix. And I mean, this is a must have book if you want to find out from a personal researcher who has personal experiences and who has done 15 years of research on South Mountain and dug up all this documents. I mean, this is small. Okay. My other books on Amazon, there's more details, but that one's my latest one. That's my favorite one there. And whether or not you're in Tucson or Phoenix or wherever you are at, that will teach you on where to see UFOs, how to see them, what kind of camera, the night vision camera. You always want to use night vision for the orbs because you can see them a lot better. And also the pattern, the solar flare connection, and the possible giants. I mean, it goes in. It's thin, but it has a lot of good stuff in there. Lots of good color photographs, and oh my God, there's one where there's I found a evidence of the Mayans. You know how the Quetzalcoatl pyramid, and they had that serpent at the bottom of the pyramid, the moon pyramid, the solstice with the snake. Same ones in Phoenix. Okay, whole comps built the same one in Phoenix, and I show that in the book. And a lot of stuff, a lot of evidence. People looking up at orbs carved. Do you have that petroglyph picture? I thought I sent it to you. But yeah, I discovered this petroglyph rock of these orbs, of these people looking up at orbs, and they're in the appeasement pose. They're in the worshiping pose. So they're clearly worshiping these light orbs in the sky, and that's all documented in Phoenix. That's carved on the mountains in Phoenix, Arizona. So and I did a news report on that in 2010, and on that discovery. So yeah, the petroglyphs are total UFO sightings, man, without a shadow of a doubt, especially around the Phoenix, Arizona site and here in Tucson. All right. So it's all basically the same stories, the same stuff. So it's fascinating.
What's the name of your YouTube channel so people can go see more of those UFO videos?
So it's called the Phoenix Lights, Petroglyphs in the Sky. It's all one word. The Phoenix Lights, Petroglyphs in the Sky. That other channel, Petroglyphs in the Sky, that's dead. I can't get into it anymore. But all the new stuff is on the Phoenix Lights. Make sure it says Phoenix Lights, Petroglyphs in the Sky on YouTube. And you can also find me on Facebook under Petroglyphs in the Sky, Jeff Woolwine, and to contact me there.
Jeff, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
I think, what I've been saying all along, I really think we need to take a second look at these petroglyphs. I think these petroglyphs is part of our own history, and it's possible that history could repeat itself. And we really need to understand what our future holds, because to understand the future, we must understand the past. And I'm telling you, these mountains here is full of the information. They're like sacred scrolls of information. And once you find these mountains with the petroglyphs and the spirals, that will lead you to greater things, and you will get a better outlook on what's been visiting us for thousands of years that has always been here with us, and get a better understanding. And not just, don't take my opinion, don't take someone else's opinion. You go out and you do the research. That's what my books are all about. It's teaching you to do the things that I did to see them. If you want to see these things, these books tell you how to do it. I'm firsthand an experiencer. I know, I've seen it. I have the documents to prove it. And the scientific, it's not only science, history, archaeology, ufology. That's it.
Jeff, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.